way governments measure things is a little bit different to we as consumers consume things. 6 out of 10 web users visit government sites. This statistic only becomes interesting to me when that's the only way to get to a government site. And every user, regardless of how they're online, uses government services through online mechanisms only. Then we get real economies of scale, and then we get real changes in behaviours. And e-security, 52% of UK businesses had e-breaches in 2005. E-breaches, positive, huh? So from our perspective, from consumers' perspective, a few kind of slightly different views about the way digital has affected us all. Don't you like that one? 2006, 1 in 8 US marriages started with an online relationship. It's probably a good idea to ask me what's happened to the divorce rate since then. But in the US, the divorce rate was so bad it didn't actually change. If MySpace, with 230 million users, was a country, it would be the 5th biggest. And the first time I made this chart, it was actually only the 11th biggest, which was a little over 2 years ago. So that in its own right is having a pretty big impact on the way people use the web. 6 billion searches on Google per month, up from 2.7 when I first made the chart. And what I've become to understand more and more is that Korea and Japan, as fairly substantial markets, don't use Google. They use their own country-specific and language-specific versions, and they use them more on their mobile devices than they do on fixed devices. So when you start to look at the scale of numbers that are thrown into online searches, when you add Korea and Japan to that Google number, it is even more extraordinary. Number of text messages per day exceeds the human population. And that's not just within my family, which sometimes it feels like. 4 exabytes of data. Remember the chart with the exabytes on it? Created in 2008. That's actually, I believe, more than all previous digital data ever created in history. And this year we're on track to do that again. In other words, it'll be in excess of 8, which will be, once again, more than the entire histories of data created again. And so that creates an enormous amount of impact on the networks that we have to build and the services we have to deliver over. 50 million laptops were shipped in 2008. That number will be significantly more this year. And in any case, computers are only one of many, many devices. But the way laptops connect has already evolved and significantly changing. By 2020, our high-end broadband connected users will be using a gigabit per second. We forecast that about 8 years ago, and back then I started presenting a graph which one of my colleagues and I created a long time ago, and I've probably presented a graph about 500 times, and I found that that graph indicates by 2020 a gigabit for high-end users. That graph it draws a lot of attention. Half the people I present it to say I'm crazy because it's too conservative, and the other half say I'm crazy because I'm too aggressive. So I feel it's fairly well rationalised and justified now across the region. It's probably about right. 90% of broadband programming, of broadcast programming in the US is available online in full screen quality now. So that the lines are blurring between where content is being sourced, whether it's broadcast or online. 2 million homes in the US market already have what I would call real IPTV, which is nothing to do with the internet. And I want to re-emphasise that. It's got nothing to do with the internet. It's not about video on demand downloads and non-real-time downloads. It's about real broadcasting experience delivered over a closed network environment that can be controlled with quality of service. And it is a very important value-added capability in a network which enables a whole raft of other things well beyond just a simple TV viewing experience. And I suppose just to bring myself back down to earth and all of us other speakers today, we saw quite recently a very important press statement about 7 grams of carbon dioxide produced for every Google search by a very learned professor out of a very important university in the US. And within days, there was another report from a different university which showed about an order of magnitude and a half less than that for the same outcome, which I think probably casts credibility doubts on all of us in the industry as we try and come to grips with how to even measure those sorts of things. Because it's an extraordinarily difficult thing to capture how many things are affected by a Google search. And in fact, because those numbers are going up so great, every time there's a search, it actually consumes less energy than the previous one. So, very interesting challenge. But nonetheless, the amount of carbon dioxide produced by all the things we do is something we have to care a lot about. One of the things we all know, and even if we don't know the numbers, we know instinctively, video is having an enormous impact on the internet today. And I wanted to highlight a couple of important things about YouTube and other things as well. Consumes more bandwidth than the entire web did in 2000, just YouTube alone, which equates to 100 million video views every day. And every minute, 13 hours of new video is added, and there are 75 million unique video elements on YouTube. That was in September 2008, with about half an exabyte of storage to support it. And it loses money, which is really interesting. And by May 2009, all of those numbers have nearly doubled. So rather than just updating the chart and showing you the most recent ones, I thought it would be more instructive to remind us how much has changed in the last 6 or 7 months. And from my perspective, the thing that is the absolute takeaway from the YouTube experience is today's generation of teenagers utterly believe that video must be shareable. And if it isn't shareable, it's broken. YouTube has done that for us, even with a broken business model. And the really good thing is that now that consumers are starting to recognise the value of sharing video, and the statistics we heard earlier about upload content, that's largely derived from video types of services. But the graph on the right is also an important piece of this puzzle. 4 hours of TV viewing for a 12-year-old in the US was considered normal in 1996, and it still is today, and it's likely to still be in 2013. But what's different is that there is an increasingly large amount of content being viewed via PCs and mobile devices as well, so that by 2013 there's about 8 hours worth of viewing per day. Now, clearly that doesn't make any sense, right? How could anybody actually sit in front of the TV for 8 hours in a day? And the odd 12-year-old might, but what this is really reflecting is that they're actually doing two things at once or more. This is really all about watching TV, sort of, while also consuming other forms of content. You know, so we all have read the statistics about mobile movie downloads and viewing of content on mobile phones happens to coincide during the same busy hours at home when the mobile phone and its user are at home. Extraordinary shift in the way users behave with their devices. How much bandwidth is enough bandwidth? And even though I want to talk about consumers, that hot subject keeps coming up. And I thought it was quite instructive to even just do a little bit of a summary of screen size and the impact of the sort of bandwidths required. But I didn't put on here the actual bandwidths required to deliver these things, because it does vary a lot depending on what sorts of things you're doing. But it does illustrate that we've shifted in terms of content and quality of content from standard definition in many cases through various forms of high definition. And we are already foreseeing the emergence of super high definition with the 4K standard, which significantly increases the amount of data needed to deliver content. And with ultra high definition, it's basically taking the quality of a digital, 10 megabit digital camera and producing video in that sort of form factor. And in any case, when you start looking at the 3D TV that we put on the demo outside, it helps to illustrate that these things are not standing still. And those sorts of 3D TVs will be commercial, cost-effective, and considerably less headache-inducing than that form of early generation 3D TV. And that one out there requires a minimum of about 20 megabits per second to deliver a service to it. And that will be a ever-increasing amount of bandwidth required to deliver services. So that the amount of bandwidth is never enough. That's basically the short answer. And it's driven by video and its quality.